Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am incredibly thrilled to have you here as we unpack one of the most highly debated everyday dilemmas of our modern lives. You know, we make a choice about this every single morning, sometimes without even thinking about it, but the science behind it is absolutely fascinating. Today, we're taking a magnifying glass to our morning eating habits, and we're asking a surprisingly complex question. Should you skip breakfast?
We have all heard this age-old morning mantra. Growing up, it was practically treated as undeniable nutritional law, right? You wake up, you eat. But over the last decade or so, this universally accepted advice has been aggressively challenged by new dietary trends and just a massive cultural shift. So we have to ask, is breakfast really the most important meal of the day, or is that just a brilliantly marketed myth?
To understand where we're at right now, we kind of have to look at where we started. Back in the 1960s, nutritionist Adele Davis popularized a famous quote. She said, "Eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper." And this traditional view, it shaped decades of dietary ideology. The core belief was that a massive influx of calories first thing in the morning provided the essential fuel you needed for the day, jump-starting your metabolism and, in theory, preventing you from overeating later on.
But fast forward to the modern era, and we're seeing a complete reversal. Take popular fitness personality Kino Body, for example, who notes, "I've been skipping breakfast for 12 years. Once you adapt to fasting, you get incredible productivity." This perfectly represents the modern fitness perspective, which leans super heavily into intermittent fasting. Proponents argue that ditching the morning meal helps you get lean, achieves metabolic flexibility, and actually sharpens your mind for the busy day ahead.
Section 1. The Great Breakfast Debate. Okay, let's dive into this.
We have two wildly contrasting viewpoints here, and both sides claim to hold the key to optimal health. But first, we really need to acknowledge that for a lot of people, skipping breakfast isn't some calculated health strategy at all. Honestly, it's just a byproduct of modern life. When we look at data from university students, a staggering 48% skip meals simply due to a lack of time. Another 19% just lack a morning appetite, and 13% cite an inability to cook. So before we even touch the biology, we have to recognize that the universal morning rush is the primary driver of this behavior for a massive portion of the population.
Section 2. The Case for Skipping.
However, for those who do it intentionally, the modern fasting trend has gained incredible momentum. Deliberate skippers are chasing some highly appealing benefits. First off, omitting the meal is a very straightforward, simple way to achieve a daily calorie deficit, which we know is essential for weight loss. Second, many report a significant boost in mental clarity and morning productivity. And third, it completely eliminates early morning decision fatigue. You just wake up, you don't even have to think about what to cook or eat, you just get right down to business.
Section 3. The Hidden Health Risks.
But what actually happens when we look past the fitness influencers and dive into the established scientific literature? Well, the data highlights some very real systemic health implications of running on an empty morning stomach. The research paints a pretty sobering picture of chronic breakfast omission. Large-scale epidemiological studies heavily correlate skipping breakfast with adverse phenotypic outcomes. We're talking about increased cardiometabolic risks, a higher incidence of obesity, and impaired glycemic control. Beyond that, studies note reduced immune function, chronic inflammation, lower bone mineral density, and, let's be real, everyday symptoms like fatigue, headaches, and severe mood swings.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact tension we are dealing with. On one side, the promised benefits of fasting, mental clarity, a streamlined calorie deficit, and productivity. On the other side, the clinical risks, fatigue, insulin resistance, and systemic inflammation. It's a striking juxtaposition. How on earth can one single practice produce such radically different outcomes in different people?
Section 4. The Biological Impact.
To really understand this, we have to look under the hood at the peripheral mechanism of appetite regulation. Basically, our brain receives continuous signals from the gastrointestinal tract via these really powerful hormones. When you skip breakfast, your hunger hormone, which is called ghrelin, spikes, driving up your demand for energy. Conversely, fullness or satiety hormones like GLP-1 and PYY regulate when you actually feel satisfied. If you skip a meal, you are profoundly altering this delicate hormonal signaling, which can lead to major dysregulation later in the day. Now, this hormonal dysregulation directly ties into a fascinating biological phenomenon known as the second meal effect. This is essentially the inhibition of the glycemic reaction to your second meal of the day. What this means in plain English is that if you miss breakfast, well, when you finally do eat your first meal at lunchtime, your body can experience a wildly exaggerated glucose and insulin spike. By skipping the first meal, you effectively make your body less efficient at processing the next one.
Furthermore, we absolutely have to consider chrononutrition. This is how meal timing impacts our internal biological clocks. The research specifically points out that breakfast skippers, particularly females, can display a disrupted cortisol rhythm and even elevated blood pressure. Cortisol is our primary stress hormone. It naturally peaks in the morning to help wake us up. So, forcing the body to run on empty can add unnecessary physiological stress. It just proves that when you eat is sometimes just as important as what you eat.
Section 5. Finding your breakfast balance.
So, where does all of this leave us? We've seen the fasting perks, and we've definitely seen the systemic health risks. The synthesis of these two viewpoints is actually pretty empowering. Breakfast is not a one-size-fits-all mandate. The right choice depends entirely on your unique biological individuality and your lifestyle. However, before you go personalizing your routine, medical consensus is incredibly clear about certain populations who should definitively avoid intermittent fasting or skipping meals. If you're pregnant, if you are a growing child or adolescent, or if you're prone to severe blood sugar drops, you really should prioritize a nutritious morning meal. Your biological demands simply require it.
So the crucial point is how you actually apply this to your own life. Here is an actionable, nuanced approach recommended by nutritionists to help you navigate your own morning dilemma. Step 1, actually assess your morning hunger. If you aren't hungry, don't force it. Step 2, consider waiting 60 to 90 minutes after waking up before you eat. This allows your natural cortisol levels to stabilize your brain function. And Step 3, if you find that skipping breakfast leads to a massive energy crash or just intense cravings in the afternoon, adapt. Opt for a small, protein-rich morning meal instead of a heavy carb load. That's going to keep your blood sugar incredibly stable.
We've explored the traditional advice, the modern fasting trends, and the deeply complex hormonal cascades that dictate our appetite and our energy. You now have the full picture of the great breakfast debate. So I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder as you set your alarm tonight. What is your biology telling you to do tomorrow morning? Listen to your body, experiment smartly, and design the morning routine that makes you feel your absolute best. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.